My beloved child, something happened last night that I cannot keep hidden from you any longer. There was a moment in the stillness of the night when everything seemed ordinary, yet somehow the atmosphere changed in a way that felt impossible to ignore. A thought appeared with such force that it felt as though your entire story had suddenly been opened to a new page. And the strange part is this: the thought was not about your victories, your achievements, or the moments when everyone praised you. It was about the struggles you survived when almost nobody knew how difficult they truly were. It was about those nights when you smiled during the day but quietly carried questions into the darkness. It was about the times you wondered whether all your effort meant anything, whether anyone truly understood how much you had endured, and whether your life would ever move beyond the same painful cycle. But last night, something became clear. Your struggles were never meaningless chapters. They were shaping something inside you that you could not yet see. Don't skip this, because the next part of this message may explain why certain experiences in your life had to happen exactly the way they did. Stay till the end, because something huge is waiting for you, and I want you to understand every piece of what is about to be revealed. You may have thought that your difficult seasons were evidence that you were falling behind. You may have compared yourself with people who seemed to move forward effortlessly while you were forced to rebuild yourself again and again. You watched others celebrate milestones while you were simply trying to make it through another day with your hope intact. And perhaps the hardest part was that nobody could see the full battle. They saw your face, but they did not see the thoughts behind your eyes. They heard your words, but they did not hear every silent question you asked yourself when you were alone. They saw you continue, but they did not know how many times you nearly convinced yourself to stop trying. Yet somehow, you continued. That is the detail that matters most. You continued even when you did not have all the answers. You continued when your confidence was low. You continued when the future looked uncertain. You continued when the road ahead seemed completely different from the life you imagined. And last night, the realization came with unusual clarity. Perhaps the greatest evidence of your strength is not what you have accomplished, but the fact that you refuse to let your hardest moments define the ending of your story. Think about that carefully. There were moments that could have changed you permanently. There were disappointments that could have made you bitter. There were delays that could have convinced you that nothing would ever change. There were people whose absence may have left questions in your heart. There were opportunities that disappeared at the exact moment you thought they were finally yours. There were days when you had to pretend everything was fine because explaining your feelings seemed harder than carrying them alone. And yet, somewhere beneath all of that, a quiet part of you kept saying, "There must be more." That voice may have been small, but it survived. That is why this message is reaching you now. Not because your past should be forgotten, but because your past may finally be showing you what it was preparing you to become. Don't skip. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you, and the most surprising part is that the revelation may not be about something arriving from outside your life. It may be about something that has been growing inside you for much longer than you realized. There is another reason last night felt different, and this is where the story becomes more personal. Imagine for a moment that every struggle you experienced left behind something invisible. One difficult season gave you patience. Another gave you courage. Another taught you how to recognize sincerity. Another showed you the difference between being surrounded by people and actually being understood. Another forced you to discover that you could stand again after believing you had nothing left to give. At the time, none of those lessons felt like gifts. They felt like burdens. You did not wake up during those difficult days thinking, "This experience is making me stronger." You were simply trying to get through it. You wanted relief, not lessons. You wanted answers, not more questions. You wanted the door to open, not another reason to wait. But life has a strange way of revealing the purpose of certain chapters only after we have turned the page. That is why you may be looking backward now and realizing that some of the things you once begged to escape from actually changed the direction of your life. You became more observant. You became more careful about who received your trust. You became less impressed by appearances and more interested in what exists beneath them. You learned that loud promises mean very little without consistent action. You learned that some people can know your name without knowing your heart. You learned that silence can reveal what explanations hide. You learn that losing something does not always mean losing your future. Sometimes it means making room for a future you could not have imagined before. And perhaps this is why the story of your struggles made me feel something so deeply last night. It was not pity. It was recognition. It was the realization that you have been carrying a story much bigger than the version people see from the outside. There is a difference between someone who has never faced difficulty and someone who has faced difficulty and still chooses to believe that tomorrow can be better. You belong to the second kind. You may not always feel courageous, but courage does not require you to feel fearless. Sometimes courage is simply waking up and trying again while uncertainty is still sitting beside you. Sometimes courage is making one small decision when you cannot see the whole road. Sometimes courage is protecting your peace even when explaining yourself would be easier. Sometimes courage is refusing to become the person your pain tried to create. And that last one may be the most important. Your struggles may have given you reasons to become cold, but something inside you kept choosing warmth. They gave you reasons to distrust everyone, but you still hoped to find genuine connection. They gave you reasons to stop dreaming, but somewhere inside you, the dream remained alive. That is not weakness. That is evidence that your deepest self survived the chapters that were supposed to make you give up. Stay till the end. Don't skip this part, because there is a reason the story of your struggles is connected to what is about to happen next. Something huge is waiting for you, and the closer you get to understanding your past, the more clearly you may recognize the doorway opening in your future, but there is something you may have misunderstood about the waiting period. You may have assumed that nothing was happening simply because nothing was visible. You looked at your life and saw delays. You saw unfinished plans. You saw unanswered questions. You saw situations that seemed stuck in the same place. You wondered why progress appeared so slow when your heart was ready for change. Yet there are seasons when progress happens beneath the surface. A seed does not look impressive while it is underground. Nobody applauds it for the work it is doing where nobody can see. But underneath that quiet soil, roots are forming. Strength is developing. Preparation is taking place. And perhaps your life has been in a similar season. You have been developing roots. You have been learning how to stand without constant reassurance. You have been discovering what truly matters to you. You have been becoming more selective with your energy. You have been realizing that peace is more valuable than approval. You have been learning that not every opportunity deserves your attention and not every person deserves unlimited access to your heart. These are not small changes. They are signs of maturity. They are signs that the person who enters your next chapter will not be the same person who entered your previous one. This is where the story becomes surprising, because you may be waiting for your circumstances to change before believing that your life has changed. But what if the transformation began earlier? What if the strongest version of you has already been forming through every moment you thought was simply another disappointment? What if the reason certain things no longer satisfy you is because you have outgrown the version of yourself that once accepted them? What if your restlessness is not proof that something is wrong, but proof that something within you is ready for something different? Do not rush past that thought. Stay till the end. Don't skip. Something huge is waiting for you, and it may completely change the way you interpret the road behind you. There is a moment in every person's life when they realize that they cannot return to who they used to be. They may revisit old places, remember old conversations, or think about old dreams, but something inside them has shifted. That shift can feel confusing because the old life may still look familiar while no longer feeling like home. Perhaps that is happening to you now. You may be noticing that certain conversations no longer excite you. Certain patterns no longer feel acceptable. Certain environments drain you faster than they used to. Certain dreams have become clearer while others have quietly lost their importance. This is not necessarily confusion. Sometimes it is clarity arriving slowly. Sometimes growth feels uncomfortable because the old identity is still trying to hold on while the new. Because the moment I am about to describe was not ordinary, and the person you love may never look at you quite the same way again. Earlier today, they were surrounded by friends, laughter, music, conversations, and all the distractions people use when they want to convince themselves that everything is fine. It looked like an ordinary gathering from the outside. Nobody could have guessed that one small moment would change the entire atmosphere. Nobody could have predicted that your name would become the center of a conversation you were not even present for. But then your photo appeared. And suddenly, everything changed. The laughter became quieter. The conversations slowed down. Someone looked at your picture for longer than expected. Someone else asked a question that seemed simple but carried much more emotion than anyone wanted to admit. And the person you love, the one whose feelings you may have questioned, the one whose silence may have confused you, the one you may have wondered was slowly forgetting you, did something that nobody at that gathering expected. Do not skip this part, because the first reaction was only the beginning. Stay till the end, because something huge is waiting for you, and the most unforgettable moment did not happen when they first saw your photo. It happened a little later, after someone said something that touched a place inside them they had been trying desperately to keep hidden. Imagine the scene for a moment. They are sitting among people who know pieces of their life. Someone is talking, someone is laughing, someone is showing pictures, and then your image appears on a screen or a phone. For one brief second, there is no explanation. Just your face. And the person you love freezes. Not dramatically. Not in a way everyone would immediately understand. It was subtler than that. Their expression changed. Their eyes stayed there. Their smile disappeared for a moment. And that tiny pause told a story that words could not tell. One of their friends noticed it. Maybe they said, "You still care, don't you?" And that question landed harder than anyone expected. Because sometimes the truth is not revealed by what a person says. Sometimes it is revealed by the silence that follows a question they were not prepared to answer. Don't skip. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you, because what happened after that question is the reason this story matters. There are moments when a person can hide behind ordinary behavior, but there are also moments when the heart reacts before the mind has time to build a defense. That was the moment. Your photo was still there, and suddenly the room did not feel as light as it had a few seconds earlier. One friend tried to make the situation playful, perhaps teasing them, perhaps asking whether they had finally moved on. But instead of laughing it away, they became unusually quiet. And that silence made everyone more curious. Someone asked whether they still thought about you. They could have said no. It would have been easy. One word could have ended the conversation. But they didn't say it. That is where everything became different. Their eyes returned to your picture, and for a few seconds they seemed to forget that anyone else was watching. There was something deeply personal in that expression, something that looked like memory. Perhaps they remembered a conversation with you that nobody else knew about. Perhaps they remembered the way you supported them when they were struggling. Perhaps they remembered one ordinary day that meant nothing to anyone else but somehow became unforgettable to them. This is what people often misunderstand about love. They think the strongest feelings are always loud. They expect dramatic confessions, emotional speeches, and obvious signs. But sometimes the deepest feelings reveal themselves in the smallest reactions. A person can say, "I'm fine," while their eyes are saying something completely different. A person can laugh with friends while carrying one particular memory quietly inside them. And when your picture appeared, that hidden memory may have returned all at once. Don't skip this story, because there is another layer you need to understand. The gathering did not simply remind them of you. It forced them to confront something they had been avoiding. They had been telling themselves that time had changed everything. They had been trying to convince themselves that distance meant detachment. They may even have told people that they were completely okay. But seeing you unexpectedly challenged that story. Suddenly, the question was no longer whether they remembered you. The question became why they still reacted so strongly when your face appeared. And that question stayed in the room. Then came the moment that nobody expected. One of the friends looked at them and said something along the lines of, "If you really don't care anymore, why did your whole expression change?" There was no easy answer. The person you love looked away. That simple movement carried more weight than a long speech could have carried. They were not ready to explain themselves. Maybe they did not even understand themselves completely. But their friends could see that something had shifted. And then, instead of changing the subject, someone asked another question. Have you ever actually told them what you feel? That question opened a door they had kept closed for a long time. Because sometimes the hardest thing is not admitting that you love someone. The hardest thing is admitting that you may have hurt someone you never wanted to lose. Their face became serious. The atmosphere changed again. The person who had been smiling earlier was now sitting quietly, looking at your picture as though they were seeing it for the first time. And then they said something that made everyone stop. They admitted that there were things they wished they had said to you. Not necessarily some grand declaration. Not some perfect movie line. Something much more human. They wished they had explained why they pulled away. They wished they had been more honest about what they were feeling. They wished they had not allowed pride, confusion, timing, or fear to create distance between you. And perhaps the most painful part was this: they realized that while they were trying to protect themselves, they may have made you believe that you were not important. That realization can hit a person harder than anything else. Because there is a special kind of regret that comes from knowing you made someone question their worth when, deep down, you knew they mattered enormously to you. Stay till the end. Don't skip. Something huge is waiting for you, because this was not the biggest revelation of the night. It was only the moment when the truth began to surface. After that, the conversation became more personal. The friends stopped teasing. They started listening. Someone asked what they would say if you were suddenly standing in front of them. At first, they hesitated. Then they looked at your photo again. And the answer came slowly. They said they would probably begin by apologizing. Not because everything between you had been their fault, but because there were moments when they could have communicated better and chose silence instead. They would say they never wanted you to feel forgotten. They would say that some memories never disappeared simply because people stopped talking. They would say that there were days when they almost reached out but stopped themselves because they did not know whether you wanted to hear from them. And then they revealed something even more surprising. They admitted that they had wondered whether you had moved on. That thought had bothered them more than they wanted anyone to know. They had imagined you becoming happy without them. They had imagined someone else making you laugh, someone else becoming the person you called first, someone else hearing the stories they once heard. And although they had no right to control your life, the thought still created a strange ache inside them. That was when one friend said, "Maybe you should stop wondering and start being honest." Those words stayed with them. Because there comes a point when uncertainty becomes more painful than truth. Maybe the truth is difficult. Maybe the answer is not what someone hopes for. But uncertainty can keep a person trapped for far too long. The person you love seemed to understand that. They looked at your photo again, and this time there was something different in their expression. It was not simply sadness. It was determination mixed with vulnerability. They were beginning to consider something they had been afraid to consider before. And that possibility was you. Not the memory of you. Not the old version of you. You, as you are now. Don't skip, because the next part of this story reveals why your picture appeared in the first place, and that detail changes everything. You may be wondering how your photo suddenly became part of their gathering. It may have happened casually. Someone could have been scrolling through old pictures. Someone might have been sharing memories from a previous time. Perhaps your photo appeared among several others without anyone deliberately planning it. But what matters is what happened afterward. The person you love did not treat your picture like an ordinary photograph. They stared at it. And for a moment, the entire gathering seemed to disappear around them. Have you ever noticed how one image can bring back an entire chapter of life? A face can remind someone of a conversation, a place, a promise, a laugh, a difficult night, or a moment when they felt understood. Your photo may have carried all of that for them. And perhaps they suddenly realized something they had not allowed. Conversation had ended, but the truth it uncovered had followed them home. The room was quiet now, the distractions were gone, and there was nobody around to make a joke or change the subject. They were finally alone with the image of you still sitting inside their thoughts. And this is where the story takes a turn you may not expect. They did not simply remember you, they began remembering specific moments. The little things. The details most people would forget. The way you once reacted to something they said. A conversation that lasted longer than either of you planned. A moment when you encouraged them without asking for anything in return. A time when you noticed they were not okay even though they said they were fine. These memories came back one after another, almost like someone had opened a door they thought was permanently closed. And suddenly, the person they had been trying to convince themselves they had forgotten became incredibly clear in their mind. Don't skip. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you, because one of those memories made them realize that they may have misunderstood what your presence meant in their life. They remembered that when everything around them felt uncertain, you had somehow made things feel lighter. They remembered how easy it was to talk to you. They remembered how safe it felt to be understood without having to explain every little thing. And then came the thought they had been avoiding: why did I let that go? That question can be more powerful than any confession. Because regret does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it appears in the middle of an ordinary night, when everything is quiet and there is nowhere left to hide from your own thoughts. They may have realized that they had spent too much time focusing on what could go wrong and not enough time appreciating what was already real. And the more they thought about it, the more uncomfortable the truth became. They did not want to lose the connection completely. They may have accepted distance, but deep down, they had never truly accepted the idea of a life where you meant nothing to them. That was the realization that stayed with them long after the party was over. What happened next was even more revealing, because they started asking themselves questions they had avoided for a long time. What if you still cared? What if you had been waiting for clarity too? What if the distance between you was built more from misunderstanding than from a lack of feeling? What if both of you had been silently protecting yourselves from the same fear? These questions can change everything because they transform a memory into a possibility. Suddenly, they were no longer thinking only about the past. They were thinking about the future. And that scared them. Because imagining a future involving you meant admitting that the story might not be finished. They looked at their phone again. Your name was still there. Your picture was still there. The possibility of reaching out was still there. But so was the fear of what might happen afterward. They wondered whether you would respond warmly or cautiously. They wondered whether you would believe them. They wondered whether old misunderstandings would return. Most importantly, they wondered whether they had waited too long. That thought hurt. Because there is a difference between missing someone and realizing you may have missed your chance with them. the second one carries a completely different weight. They may have sat there thinking about all the moments when they could have spoken honestly but didn't. All the times they wanted to ask how you were but decided against it. All the times pride told them to wait. All the times fear convinced them that silence was safer. And now they were beginning to understand the cost of that silence. Don't skip. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you. Because the next realization was not about what they wanted from you. It was about what they finally understood about themselves. They realized that they had been using excuses to avoid vulnerability. They had told themselves they were protecting their peace. They had told themselves that moving forward meant never looking back. They had told themselves that if something was meant to happen, it would happen naturally. But deep down, they knew something was missing from that explanation. Sometimes things do not happen naturally. Sometimes someone has to be brave enough to speak. Sometimes a connection needs an honest conversation before either person can truly understand what happened. And now they were thinking about that conversation. Not a dramatic conversation. Not one filled with impossible promises. Just an honest one. They wanted to know how you were. They wanted to know whether you had forgiven them for the things they handled badly. They wanted to know whether the distance had changed you. And perhaps most importantly, they wanted to know whether there was still a small place in your heart where they belonged. That thought frightened them because they knew they could not demand an answer. They could only ask. And asking meant accepting whatever answer came back. Yet something had changed inside them. Before seeing your photo, fear had been controlling the situation. After seeing your photo, curiosity and honesty were becoming stronger. They were beginning to realize that uncertainty could no longer be their excuse. If they never asked, they would always wonder. If they never spoke, they would never know. And sometimes a person reaches a point where not knowing becomes harder than facing the truth. That was the point they were approaching. Stay till the end. Don't skip. Something huge is waiting for you. Because this was the moment when the possibility of reaching out stopped feeling impossible and started feeling necessary, then another memory came back. It was not necessarily a dramatic one. In fact, it may have been something incredibly ordinary. Perhaps it was the way you used to laugh at something only the two of you understood. Perhaps it was a simple conversation where you told them something about your dreams. Perhaps it was the way you encouraged them during a difficult period. But that ordinary memory suddenly felt priceless. They realized that meaningful connections are often built from moments that seem insignificant while they are happening. Nobody announces, "This will become one of the memories you will carry for years." Life simply happens. Two people talk. Two people laugh. Two people share a moment. And later, when distance arrives, those tiny moments become precious. Your photo had brought all of them back. And this time, they were not trying to push them away. They allowed themselves to remember. They allowed themselves to feel. They allowed themselves to admit that they missed you. That admission may have been difficult, but it was also strangely freeing. Because pretending not to care requires energy. Pretending that someone does not matter requires constant explanation. But honesty requires only one thing: courage. And that night, they were beginning to find it. They started thinking about what they would say if they ever got the chance to speak to you again. They imagined beginning with something simple. No complicated speech. No dramatic explanation. Just the truth. I have thought about you more than you realize. Then they imagined telling you that seeing your picture today made them understand how much remained unresolved inside them. They imagined admitting that they had been afraid. Afraid of being rejected. Afraid of reopening old emotions. Afraid that you had already moved on. But perhaps they were even more afraid of never knowing. Don't skip. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you, because there was one thought they could not escape.